Well, it's hard to kind of describe that without showing you. I mean, you just, that's the cutting room, isn't it? That's where you assemble the stuff, you know, the separate stories, and then you start trying to intercut them and find places where an idea or an image calls out for cutting, cutting back here. It's, I think that's editing, basically. You know the idea you want to get across. You've got certain chronologies in the stories. This woman's dying. I didn't have her come in, and then she dies. And that's just, that's instinct, really. Yeah, tons of really good stories, and stories that you just worked so hard to get. I mean, this shows what a jerk I was, because the whole time I was making this film, I said to the series producer, "I've let you down," who was a friend of mine, and the guy was struggling. Here I am on the end of the phone saying, "I'm really sorry, I've let you down." He's just going, "Oh, God." And then I showed them like a 3-hour cut, and but there were 2 series producers. They just said, "Henry, you are the biggest jerk ever. I mean, this is amazing material," because I am quite good at getting good material. And so there were so many interesting stories in Sun City that just hit the cutting room floor. And at one point, after 90 minutes, I mean, this was such arrogance. I said, "I can't cut another frame." I barely knew what a frame of film was. "I can't cut another frame of film," and I refused to, and then and I just walked out like some diva. And of course, they said, "Henry, get your ass in here and get this down to 60 minutes." So, but yeah, I got far too much good material, actually. But it was a big budget. You could, as much. I mean, today you'd never be able to do that. I think the edit is classic example in that first film. I was so worried about film, using up too much film because it's so expensive, and we had filmed this local doctor in Ireland going to see this old man named Martin Nee, who lived in the middle of nowhere. The only guy Martin Nee ever saw was this Dr. John. And in my mind, Martin Nee was the guy that showed medicine for really old, frail people, replaces the family. And then I wanted to film in a pub in Ireland, again, to build a portrait of a place. And next thing I know, Martin Nee is there. And Martin Nee gets up and starts singing this incredibly beautiful, sad song. And the cameraman says, "Henry, should I film this?" And I said, no, we can't afford the film. And Martin Nee is supposed to be isolated, and here he is in the heart of the community. And I see you shaking your head, because it was such a dumb thing to say. And then he sings another song, and I'm like in agony at this point. Why? I say, "Okay, film it. And of course we filmed it, and it made it in the film. And the lesson to me in that first big film was, you do not edit the film when you're shooting the film. You try to give yourself as many options as you can. And Martin singing could have ended up on the cutting room floor. The place to decide it is not at the pub that night. The place to decide it is, in the cutting room. Filmmaking on some level is or the shooting is about getting as much data as you can that fits into the kind of large and rather vague idea you're exploring. I mean, I think that's partly a budgetary thing, because I've worked sort of exclusively in British television, where you don't have that indulgence. In my last film, the Kenya film, I shot most of the film and then went back and shot for another, I think it was a week or 10 days. And that, I'd like to do, and actually I did that in The Falling Man as well. So actually, I think that works better. It's ridiculous to think that you can kind of crack a film on one shoot. And I think ideally, the more you can do that, the better. But I also, that's a kind of, there are real budgetary implications to that. And just practical things. An editor, the way the business works, as we know, the editor blocks out 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 weeks for you. He or she can't turn around and go, "Okay, we'll cut for 4 weeks, and then I'll take 4 weeks off, and then we'll cut for another 3 weeks." Because people have mortgages, they have families, all that stuff, and they, it's sadly such a kind of standardized business. So there are all kinds of implications. So it's kind of hard to do that. I think the best films you can and do that. I mean, the film you were describing that you're working on, I mean, films that you make over 3 years, I'm sure, you know, you sort of have to do that, don't you? I have a structure. I go out and I talk to all these people beforehand, and I take voluminous notes, which goes back to my days as a print journalist. And then I take all my notes, and I just try to kind of shape the film on paper, really, but it's just from my head, with just kind of chapter headings. And that's what I do. So I have definitely have a kind of vague shape to the film. I knew Jonathan Briley would end up at the end of the film, and the Hernandezes, if anybody's seen this film, you know, there was another person that another journalist thought was the falling man. I knew that the Hernandezes would come before Jonathan Briley. It's not like I just go out there and film people and just make it up in the cutting room. I definitely have a kind of shape. But that's as far as I will go. And in the interviews, I clearly have, you know, having spoken to these people at length, I know what they're going to say, or I have a sense of it, and I write questions out, and then I look at them before I interview somebody, and then I stick them under my chair, and then I just try to have a conversation. And if things go off on a tangent, I will sometimes go with a tangent, because it's not as though my pre-interview covered everything, or, you know, I certainly don't hold myself to that. But there may be things that they said that I think, God, that is so interesting. And I will certainly, at certain points in the interview, guide the interview towards trying to get them to say something similar, because I have the shape of the film is sort of based on stuff that everybody said, and I do try to make films with minimal commentary, so the flow of the voices is important to me, and the flow of the voices comes from the pre-interview. So it's not like just going off and shooting an observation, but even in observational films, you try to have a slight idea of where the thing may go.